on. Oh, I think we need to get a bigger blanket. What do you think? Well, Easter is a very special holiday. And it's a very special holiday in the Christian tradition, but it's also a little bit of a secular holiday. Welcome, come on. Just join us right here. And, you know, some of you know, but what's my favorite animal? Donkey. That is true. But this story is not about a donkey. This is about a dog. And the dog is called Felice. And do you know what Felice means in English? Joy and happy. And this is about Ramona and Rodrigo have a dog called Felice. And he's the happiest dog. He's just so joyful. And they absolutely love this dog. And they take this dog for walks in the neighborhood. And the dog's really protective of them. But he gets into trouble with bushes and they have to brush the coat because it gets all these grass and burrs in it. But the dog's just so protective of them because there's some kids there who are older who kind of maybe tease Ramona and Rodriguez, but the dog will bark at them and the children kind of back off because the dog's going to really protect them. But they absolutely love this dog and they have so much time. And then every so often the dog will just go running away, and guess why it runs away? Because it sees a squirrel and it runs after the squirrel. But then the dog gets really, really ill. And eventually the dog dies. And Ramona and Rodrigo are so upset because the dog died. And they're really sad, and their parents are talking to them and they said, I can tell you really miss Felice. He goes, yeah, we really miss Felice. He said, well, you can always pretend he's there. You can always imagine that he's still alive. He said, well, we can't do that because I want to brush him and I want to play with him. We were out walking one day and they saw this squirrel. And the squirrel saw them and ran away. And he thought, Ramona says, do you think that squirrel saw Felice's ghost? And maybe that's why he ran away. And then these children who used to tease them saw them and they didn't disturb them again and said, maybe they see Felice's ghost as well. And he said, and then he kind of said, I think Felice is still with us in some ways. I still remember him. I can still remember brushing him. You know, and I really like that story because I used to have a dog. This is my dog. Can you put up the slide, please? And do you know what's his name? Do you know what his name is? Yes. His name was Tiny. Now you can imagine me with a dog called Tiny. I'm a rather large person. But this was my dog Tiny, and Tiny was a great dog. And I was actually telling the tech team during rehearsal, Tiny was really good with children, really good with adults, really good with small dogs, really aggressive with big dogs. And I don't know if that was really good or really bad self-defense. But Tiny was diabetic and it was very ill, and it died. Should have named him Cutie. That'd be a good name for it. Maybe if I get another dog, I'll name it Cutie. But I used to go out, big ears. It did have big ears, especially because it was a small dog, big ears. But the funny thing was, I'd go out walking, and I really missed it. I'd walk the same route that I would take Tiny on, because I used to walk Tiny like 3 times a day. And people would come out and ask me about him, and the neighbours all knew him as well, and they really missed him. And I could imagine Tiny walking along beside me, and it actually brought me a little bit of comfort. Because Tiny, who's that, the red person? That's my daughter Isla. Tiny's sitting in her lap. But and that was just the second day we had her, and it was a beautiful, one of my favourite pictures of her. But sometimes we can bring, if we've lost, have any of you lost a pet? No, I have my dog my whole life. Fun? I've had my dog my whole life. You've had your dog your whole life? It's quite hard. It's really hard because a dog's part of your family, isn't it? And it really is. You know, something you see every day. You probably play with it. Does it chase squirrels? Yeah, it chases squirrels. Hold on. Is he? Sorry. Yeah, I mean, dogs are a really big part of the family, and it's hard when you lose them. But you can imagine them, and it's still, when I look at this picture, it still brings me joy. And I also kind of miss him, because I miss him. He was a wonderful dog. So thank you very much. It's time for your religious education class now. And I think it's going to be a fun day. I invite you now to join me in the spirit of prayer, meditation, and reflection. These are the words of my friend and colleagues, Vanessa Rush Southern and Alison Jacks, who are ministers at our Unitarian Universalist San Francisco Church. Life is complicated and uncertain. God with some things we can count on. It has seasons of struggle and seasons of delight. And sometimes the two blow in and bloom simultaneously. Like now. Maybe always. And we are here together. All of us from different corners of the world and different families here. Now. Breathing together. Questing together. Holding each other through it all. Laughing and singing in the face of it. If there's a journey to liberation, if there's a way to live resurrection, I think it is like this. May what hold us in bondage to death or loss or hurt or sadness or literal heartbreaking limits be released. And what gives us life, hope, joy, rebirth, feel invited to claim us, and may we claim it. Sinking our roots down into what grounds us, reaching towards the sun, flowering into the season of all whose traditions witness to life more abundant, may they claim us. After a season of loss and winter, struggles of the heart and mind and spirit, and may we open our hearts to the abundance of creation that surrounds us, sustains us, and inspires us. I invite you to join me in a time of silence.
Okay, right. Okay, so I'm up here to give a reflection. The next song we'll sing in our service today is based on a poem by William Blake called Auguries of Innocence. I looked up what auguries meant, but now I have forgotten. The first verse in the song is, "Every night and every morn, some to misery are born." And you better memorize it because they're not going to be on the screen. Just kidding. Anyway, in the middle of the line, every morn and every night, some are born to sweet delight. I'd like to share some examples of those that I've learned about, observed, or experienced. Number one, walruses that, due to there not being enough sea ice on which to rest, increasingly haul out on land and are forced to find space on overcrowded cliffs, from which some of them fall to their death as they try to get back out to sea. And gratitude that my husband Jason and I have the knowledge, resources, and motivation we need to consistently reduce our carbon emissions in order to help slow climate change. Number two, animals of all kinds living in Gaza. Donkeys, stray dogs, cats, goats, chickens, zoo animals, who suffer from injuries, hunger, and lack of medical care, likely to an even greater extent than the people there. and gratitude that my husband, Jason, who was raised Jewish, recently started attending meetings of the Jewish Palestinian Living Room Dialogue Group, and that just this week I learned about a similar organization with offices in both Israel and Palestine, the Parents Circle Families Forum. It seems that the dialogue approach of these organizations may be the only realistic path to peace and justice in Israel and Palestine, and a reduction in suffering for both humans and animals harmed by the conflict. Number 3, a fawn hit by a car and left alive in the middle of a road in South Carolina 2 summers ago. Unable to stand or walk, cars drove around it. And gratitude that my family told me about the fawn so that I could help it. I traced down a park ranger and carried the fawn in my lap as we drove to meet the ranger in an isolated field. Gratitude to the ranger who took the fawn from me and ended its suffering with a gunshot to the head. My father, from whom Parkinson's disease gradually stole nearly all the things he loved to do: swim, ski, sail, sing, before he died in a 3-foot swimming pool at the age of 70. It wasn't entirely clear if he died of a heart attack or if he had drowned. And gratitude for all that I inherited from my father, including a love of diving, swimming, water and snow skiing, an acceptable singing voice, and a penchant for organizing and labeling drawers, containers, or just about anything that can be organized and labeled. My adopted son, Sebastian, who was neglected and homeless for much of the first 8 years of his life, and has continued to be hurt by too frequent outbursts of rage from me. And gratitude for therapy, which has helped me manage anger and dramatically reduce my outbursts of rage, and for Sebastian's resilience and forgiveness. Me, working in a veterinary leadership position at local nonprofit animal shelter and clinic Pets in Need for the last 3 years, a job that completely dominated my life and caused much overwhelm and frustration, and pride and satisfaction that I've often felt in my career, which is a calling for me. As one of the first veterinarians in the world to complete specialty training in the emerging field of animal shelter medicine, I've been able to make improvements in multiple animal shelters that were struggling to provide consistently high-quality care. Me again, about 4 weeks ago, when I was laid off from my job at Pets in Need because my role was eliminated due to a severe budget deficit. I was treated like I was being fired, resulting in feelings of humiliation, rejection, and mistrust. And gratitude for time to focus on my own life for the last 4 weeks, taking care of things I'd neglected. And joy, when our family visited Redwood National Park in Humboldt County the week before last, where we hiked through a stream and a fern-covered canyon, identifying plants, and finding and even briefly picking up frogs and snakes along the way. The next, and that's the end of the list. The next verse in the song that we'll sing is joy and woe are woven fine, clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. In preparing this reflection, I was able to identify only one example of joy. The components of joy that Reverend Brian outlined last Sunday, love of life and love of self, they seem to be scarce in my life. But I was able to identify many examples of gratitude and some other close cousins of joy, and several examples of doing the work, through the spiritual discipline of love. So, while silken twines of joy may be elusive, I think my divine soul is still quite well-dressed. Its wardrobe includes suffering, woven fine with efforts to prevent or end it. Violence, woven fine with efforts to find peace. Anger, woven fine with forgiveness and love. Loss, woven fine with living the legacy of those lost. Overwhelm, woven fine with purpose and passion. Rejection, woven fine with freedom and joy. The last verse of the song is, "It is right, it should be so. We were made for joy and woe. And when this we rightly know, safely through the world we go." Let it be so.
Thank you, Barbie, for a beautiful reflection. Thank you. And just so you know, auguries means signs or omens. So it's signs of omens of innocence. That's a strange word, though. Sounds like a medical condition. Joy and woe are woven fine, clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. You now know where the title for this worship service came from. It's a beautiful poem by William Blake. And just to prove that God listens to my sermons, I had an experience of woe this morning. Last Sunday, during my reflection, I mentioned how one of my small joys, I know you were all listening, but I probably don't have to remind you, but one of my small joys was showers in the morning. Well, I got in the shower this morning and there was no hot water. God listens and has a sense of humor. Yeah, I don't quite feel right without. I should have mentioned that I like hot showers. And I think one of the powerful things about that William Blake poem is that he in the larger poem, he goes through huge lists. He's got all kind of these binaries about joys and woes. But he really, the kind of real crux, I think, from the poem, from my point of view, is that it's through the difficult aspects of life, it's through the struggles, it's through the grief, it's through the losses, it's through the hardship that amplifies the joys. Without the griefs, we wouldn't have the same level, the same height of joy. Even to the extent he says you can't fully, truly know joy unless we experience sorrow and grief. And that seems a powerful message. You know, in the Christian tradition of Easter, you can't have Easter without Good Friday. Good Friday, where the empire executes Jesus. The empire being the Roman Empire. Of course, Easter there's a build up to. There's Maundy Thursday with the commandment from Jesus to his disciples about love one another as I have loved you. And he washed the feet of his disciples as a sign of love and a sign of humbling himself to his disciples. Then in Good Friday, there's the tragedy of his execution. And I just put myself in the minds and the bodies of the disciples, looking at this person they loved, this person that was inspired, this person they thought they were going to change the world. And he was executed by the empire. The devastation and the despair they must have experienced. And then there's Easter Sunday, the resurrection. That resurrection of joy from despair. Joy from despair. And the great Christian writer, Friedrich Buchner, said that the Easter message is the worst thing that happens is never the last thing. The worst thing that happens is never the last thing. I wanted to invite us into this idea of joy, and I want to talk about a mature joy. I've heard it called adult joy, but I don't like that term. I want to see mature joy. This idea of we've got to hold on to joy, knowing about suffering, knowing we're going to suffer, know we're going to experience grief, we know we're going to experience sorrow, know that we're going to experience hardships and despair, and still hold on to joy. That's a mature joy. It's not a joy without suffering. It's a joy with suffering. Joy is the gift of being able to love. And grief is the price of love. The depth of our grief is an expression for the love and appreciation for something that is no longer there. Think of people in our lives who we've lost. There's a joy in the memories of them and the way they made us feel about themselves, and there's deep grief because what we love is no longer physically present with us. And religious communities are so important in holding all that complexity. The nuanced tensions of life and death, of hope, despair, of death and life. And so much of life is about change and transformation. And whether they're good changes or less good changes, there's a joy in grief even with good changes. There can be an excitement about a new job, and then there's a grief of leaving maybe an old job, of friends at the old job. Even with marriage, there's a joy of finding love and coming together. And some of us maybe grieve the single life that we had and the freedom that we had with it. Be honest, perhaps there's a loss with that. And it's the birth of a child for those of us who've been fortunate enough to have be parents. There's a joy of this newborn baby that we're so excited about. And then there's the grief of the sleepless nights, the worry, the lifelong worry, are our children going to be okay? And probably a grief around the freedom that we lose as parents. It's complex. Even those great things that happen to us carry an element of loss amongst us. And I think as a true and authentic religious community, we need to honor all that nuanced complexity. But one of the important things, I think, for religious communities is to have to embrace that joy and to embrace this idea of celebration, celebrating the joy, not letting joy just pass by, acknowledging it and celebrating it. And the Jewish rabbi Joshua Heschel says, people of our time are losing the power of celebration. Instead of celebrating, we seek to be amused or entertained. Celebration is an active state, an act of expressing reverence or appreciation. To be entertained is a passive state. It is to receive pleasure afforded by an amusing act or a spectacle. Celebration is a confrontation, giving attention to the transcendent meaning of one's actions. Celebration is a confrontation, giving attention to the transcendent meaning of one's action. Those are the words of Rabbi Joshua Heschel. And I think about that. We talk in our Unitarian Universalist tradition about celebrations of life for those who have passed. We sometimes slip in memorial services, but we focus of it as a celebration of the life. And think about those celebration of lives you've been at. They can often be joyfully bittersweet, and recalling what the person meant to us, and sorrow at their absence. Celebration, though, can be a path to joy, and not just as a result of joy. Because I think most of our celebrations of life do bring that element of joy while holding the sorrow. And a few weeks ago, I was at a celebration of life for the Reverend Dr. Dorsey Blake, who was my academic advisor when I was in seminary. He was a member of the Church for All Fellowship, or the Church for the Fellowship of All, which was started in 1947. It was an intentionally integrated African-American white congregation with a white minister and an African-American minister, co-presidents, mixed boards. And it was a wonderful place, and it was a large black population at the service. Reverend Dorsey Blake was an African-American. And there was a joy there. The songs were joyful. There was percussionists, and it was a long service. It was 2.5 hours, and I left. It wasn't even finished at that point. I had to go. I thought I did long memorial services or celebrations of life, but there was one speaker said this beautiful thing, and Dorsey, who I love dearly, was an amazing, joyous person. And one of the speakers said, "This service is drenched in Dorsey. Therefore, we are all drenched in joy." We're all drenched in joy. I love that image. Having a service, even a celebration of life where you're drenched in joy. This morning I was drenched in cold water in my shower. Not quite as joyous. And Howard Thurman, who actually started that congregation of all fellowships, Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman, says this: "Whatever may be the tensions and stresses of a particular day, there is always lurking close at hand the trailing beauty of forgotten joy or unremembered peace." Whatever may be the tensions and stresses of a particular day, there is always lurking close at hand the trailing beauty of forgotten joy or unremembered peace. I think it's really important to remember this idea that joy is a spiritual act of honoring the vitality and interconnection of all aspects of our life. The interconnection between the hope and despair that is held up at Easter time. Ultimately, it's contentment. Joy is this contentment with the present moment, despite life's challenges. Contentment in this moment now, despite what's happening. There's a big awful in the big political news, but right now, can we find joy? Can we be drenched in joy from our own experiences? Because ultimately what religious community is about, what religion is about at its best, is meaning making. How can we make meaning of our life and our life's experiences? And joy and woe are part of our life experiences, and perhaps are some of the richest sources of meaning in our life. And I mentioned, Beth in our announcements mentioned the Zine article, and I wrote about struggles I've been having over the last 2 or 3 months in my Zine article. And my Zine article's the last page, so you probably haven't read it yet. Yeah. And I was struggling with check-ins at the church. Because people would be asking me how I'm doing, and I'm going, I'm doing really well, but the inner voice was saying to me, but I shouldn't be. My brother is struggling with myeloma, has been in and out of hospital. He's been struggling with it for 5 years, but he was hospitalized in December for 3 weeks. My brother-in-law has blood cancer and is on the verge of homelessness. And I've lost 3 friends my age in the last 2 months. And then my academic advisor, who was about older died. I've been dealing with all of this, but I still feel joyful. You know, and part of me thinks, am I just emotionally disconnected from life? But I was actually in a long discussion with a colleague of mine, and I recognized that joy and fully living into my life, the positive aspects of life, is my response to that hardship. It's not something to feel guilty about. That was the path I'm choosing. I'm appreciating my life, because those 3 people I lost were all my age. A couple were a couple of years younger. I need to live my life fully and joyfully. And I know some of us, we can lose loved ones. When I lost my mum after a 7-year struggle with Alzheimer's, it was a relief. After 7 years with Alzheimer's. And there's no need to feel guilty about that. Some of us who are caregivers, lose someone, and there's a sense of relief, and there can be an element of guilt about that. There's no need for guilt. We have done our work. We have served. We have cared for. We have loved that person as best we could. And now they're gone. It's okay to touch on those positive, because those positive aspects of life, that idea of joy, that idea of gratitude, those are the things that allows us to hold. They're the vessel that allow us to hold the hardships that we all will encounter. There's no place for guilt and shame in embracing our joy. The writer Robin Wall Kimmerer says, even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of wonder and joy. I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because the joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return that gift. Joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return that gift. Those are the words of Robin Wall Kimmerer. And I think in religious communities, we're often good at looking at the negative aspects of life, the suffering, the grief, and finding meaning in that, and that is so important. But we cannot neglect joy. We cannot neglect gratitude. We cannot neglect those great connections we have with one another. We need to connect with the positive aspects of life just as much as the negative aspects of life. Because the positive aspects of life can expand our capacity to hold all of life's challenges. And joy has a sense of contentment and acceptance of life as it is, not how I want it to be. Authentic joy, authentic, mature joy contains all the struggles that we all have in our life, the disappointments, the grief, the sorrows, the losses. And if we can fully embrace that, then we can deepen our appreciation for what we have or what we have had in our life. Joy and woe are woven fine, clothing for the soul divine. May our souls grow through life's challenges by choosing and nurturing more joy in our lives. And let that joy be amplified by the struggles we face, enriching our life and enriching the life of all the communities we are part of.